This video is for business leaders who need to decide whether to persist or pack it in, either for their whole business or a particular project that they're currently working on. So have you ever stayed in a relationship way too long? I have. Have you ever quit something way too soon? I have. My guess is we've pretty much all quit something too soon and persisted well beyond the best before date of something else. It's more or less inherent in our nature to do both, though, to be honest, I strongly suspect that quitting is by far the most dominant of those two in society, especially now. So this video will give you strategies for figuring out when and whether to keep going or cut your losses in business or even personal decisions, but it's focused on business leaders in particular. So watch to the end of this video for bonus material on how to decide whether to persist, pivot, or pack it in, and a recommended video, or more accurately, my recommended video on how and when to quit. So it goes deeper, it takes a slightly different perspective, but it's kind of around the same theme. So for me, I pivoted in April of 2019 from product development to inventing better ways to help business leaders use their brains and increase their success. That is, how to use their brains better using scientifically validated techniques, rather than the tragically unscientific bullshit that is out there in much of business consulting. Sorry to say, it's the truth. So I'm making progress, but I'm still on that journey. So I'm still in the midst of that pivot. I'm not at the end of it. I'm not at a make or break period. I am sort of where I need to be, though not making the progress I wish I would. Of course, that's probably true for anybody. We want progress to be quick and ideally effortless and completely without resistance, but welcome to the real world. So this episode is about perspectives, frames, and mindsets for greater success around the idea of persisting, pivoting, or packing it in. So for me, my project that I just told you about, the consulting, is essentially a different path to the same end. So it's a pivot which will lead ultimately to a second pivot back to my original goal, because that is my lifetime vision. So for you, it may be an equivalent path, or it might be an equivalent path to a different end, but ultimately, regardless of which sort of direction you take or I take, what it comes down to is, or what it's about, is finding an equally meaningful path to a meaningful end, whether that is for you or your business. So regardless of who it's for, ultimately it's like, how meaningful is this, is probably the higher level goal. And that's when we're talking about things like mindset. So just like yesterday's episode on creating the right criteria, which helps us make better decisions, this also has criteria along the same lines, but with some different details, because this is a slightly different topic. Our main criteria for arriving at a better decision when we're thinking about pivoting, persisting, pivoting, or packing it in are timing, meaning, and relevant, objective, measurable indicators. So my favorite criteria is actually time, because as Elon Musk put it rightly, time is the ultimate currency, because it's the one thing we all have in equal measure each day, and yet most of us waste it carelessly. We all have 24 hours in a day. Doesn't matter how much richer Elon is than me, he doesn't get any more time. So it is the ultimate currency, and the one we should actually consider, spend, and invest more carefully than any other. So the other advantage of using time is or using time as a criterion is that it's always measurable, even when nothing else is. So maybe I don't know exactly, or it's very difficult for me to quantify or even qualify how much progress I'm making towards a specific goal. I can always put in X amount of time per day, which is the everyday variable is an important one for me, but it's also important for you, whether you yet use it or not. The idea is we can say, I will work hard at X task every day for Y time, regardless of those other variables, which might be a lot harder to measure. And as long as you're doing something that is productive and effective, you will make progress inevitably simply by putting in time in an effortful and productive way. So that's one of the beauties of time, is not only is it the most valuable, but it is also the most effective because it's universally a variable in terms of its availability to be measured. So another one is you can set dates or durations when you're willing to continue using a business model before changing to something else. So for example, maybe you'll say, we will pursue business leaders as a target market, assess our progress quarterly, and decide whether to change our target customer after 2 years. It's just an arbitrary fictionalized thing, but you could see how you could use it, right? Because you're doing time-based assessment, but then also a time-based deadline as to when you would reflect and change. And that's going to be based on the size of your organization, what you do, your resources, and all sorts of things that I can't anticipate in this episode. So another one you can use, and this is another one of my favorites, and I think more overarching than even time is, and that is meaning. I love Jim Collins' mindset on these variables, the variables of meaning. You can use your mission, or actually your vision, as Collins describes it in his book, Beyond Entrepreneurship. And your vision is something which is like beyond me as the leader in my organization. How do I want to change the world? So this is the distant North Star style of goal, where it'll never be achieved probably in the lifetime of the company or its current leader, but it gives you a North Star and your missions, and forget what the third one is. But the vision is the North Star, the distant direction in which you are always taking yourself, and then the mission is like climbing to the top of one specific peak. So it's a really great one to go with because it's always going to be relevant, and it will always give you a trajectory upon which you can reset your bearings, regardless of what you're doing, because you know that is your greater vision rather than your subset or your process goals, which we can think of as missions in this case. So as an example, this could be used to help leaders create meaningful, as an example of a vision, your vision could be to help leaders create meaningful change and succeed ethically while contributing positively to their employees' lives, and society. That's a good example of a vision that doesn't need to change probably within the lifetime of the leader, or perhaps even the lifetime of the entire company, even if it's centuries. And finally is the relevant, objective, measurable indicators. Now, these are, of course, are going to be specific to you and your industry and your values. Basically, you, your industry, your values, and your resources. That said, I would suggest not using probably the most popular measure because it really attracts scumbaggery and unethical behavior, and that is to use money. Since it has no ethical valence, no ethical polarity, if people use money as a criteria, unfortunately, there are far too many people who lose sight of bigger pictures, and they will do very shitty, unethical things to gain money, because there are many things. I could walk out on the street and become a criminal and hold up people and knock them down and take their money and say, well, it's very profitable. The the ROI is really quite high because the effort to the ROI is very good. And this doesn't consider at all the ethics. That is obviously unacceptable, but this is why. And if you look at Enron, if you look at Volkswagen, if you look at the Boeing, what was that? The Boeing scandal that became a Netflix special, that kind of stuff. When money becomes the primary target, it tends to lead or increase the probability of shitty, unethical behavior, which most human beings aren't okay with. So, because of that, I recommend you use something other than money as your primary criteria in terms of these objectively measurable criteria. So one of mine is really how much more effectively are my clients at creating solutions based on the neurocognitive design principles and techniques I've taught them. Now, I actually think, and this is inspired by Daniel Kahneman's Noise, the book Noise, that qualitative and relative measures are more powerful than numerical ones. Even though I am a science geek, we as science geeks or scientists, whatever you want to call it, get obsessed with numbers being the only way to measure objectively, and it's just not true. And thank you, Daniel Kahneman, for bringing this into my awareness with some parts of that book. So the reason they're more powerful than numerical ones is because they show progress in a direction which is far more intuitive to our brains than numbers. In his book, he describes that, but the gist is we can tell when something is sweeter without knowing how much sweeter, or quantifying it, which could be problematic and noisy and unreliable, or saying which of these photographs do you like better, rate them from 1 to 10, and then rate each one separately from 1 to 10, rather than saying this is more beautiful, this is less beautiful, so this goes up, this is less beautiful, it goes down. So then taking the next photo and saying which of these two is more beautiful, whichever one is goes up, the other one goes down. Vice versa, if this one is suddenly more beautiful, now you can go, there you go. So this one is more beautiful than this one, which is more beautiful than this one. This isn't numerical as such. It is comparative and relative, but not numerical. And that's more how our brains have evolved and how they really work. And Daniel Kahneman in that book shows that our brains are far more effective at making those kind of relativistic judgments between two things, between two variables, than assigning numerical values to multiple pieces of data, multiple pictures, multiple tastes, which then become highly noisy and unreliable. And what that introduces is confounding variables, which suddenly make this judgment far less reliable, far less useful in the real world. So essentially, it's our brains are far better at detecting relative differences between any two items than they are at assigning noisy and arbitrary numerical values to qualitative variables, just as I've illustrated. So let me give you an example of this. The relativistic variable that I'm talking about now is just, it's more intuitive. It's easier to use. You can just say, which one do you like better? Not how much better do you like it? How do you rate it on a numerical scale? That is enormously problematic because it involves demand characteristics and other things. It's more useful, not only because it's easier to use, because it's just damn more useful in everyday situations by any person, regardless of their qualification. So something like more delicious is really quite hard to quantify. So if you have to do both, if you have to do numerical and qualitative or relative, you can probably dump one of them, and the one to probably dump is actually the numerical. Yeah, I know I'm a science guy too, but does it really matter? If it's better, if it gives you superior and more accurate results, be a real scientist and know that it doesn't have to be numerical. It can be relativistic relative to one another and give you superior and more reliable results, that's going to win every time in proper science. And that's the problem when we use the arbitrary number system of any kind, or number systems, is that isn't much about how we evolved. It's not very intuitive to the vast majority of people. And so it causes confounding variables and compromises what would otherwise be better decisions based on something that our brain can do better. Okay, so that's it. And now I'm going to talk to you about the recommended video. The standard portion of this video is over. My recommended video is Crush It Club 98, How and When to Quit. So this is a slightly different perspective, but specifically focusing on the quitting part, not the persisting part, and not the pivoting part. And the bonus content, by the way, as far as how and when to quit, I'll put a link right here and in the description. And let me see. Now there we go. Okay, the bonus content. Put simply, deciding whether you should persist, pivot, or pack it in comes down to a few things. And that is whether you're making acceptable progress towards your goal. Again, this is not something that can be really quantified in this video. The next one is, or to be more accurate to that, progress towards your goal using your current approach. So are you making enough progress towards your goal using the approach you are? If you're not, clearly you're going to at least pivot, if not packing it in or quitting. Is the goal still relevant? Is the goal still on mission? Has the world changed in such a way that that thing is no longer relevant? And I'll give you an example of that. When I almost became a millionaire licensing a product back in 2016, the technology it was based on it was an optical image intensifier or light intensifier. It made images brighter for cameras and other optics. But in the interim between even then and now, the algorithms have become so sophisticated regarding using higher sensitivity settings on cameras and stuff, that that same thing, though good, may be irrelevant because the new technology has made it largely irrelevant. Perfect example. So is your goal still relevant? If you're aiming at a target that no longer matters, then you definitely should be quitting or pivoting to something other than what you're doing. And is that goal still meaningful to your company's vision? If at one time it was, when you re-examined it and discovered that it is, okay, keep going, especially if it's working and you're getting acceptable progress. But if it isn't, quit it now, pivot it now. So that's it for this episode. If you could please share this video with anyone who needs to decide whether to persist, pivot, or strategically quit. That's it for Crush It Club 266, Persisting, Pivoting, or Packing It In. My name is Tim B. Green. Bye for now.